Lawyers of Reddit, what are some of the most hilarious, absurd, ridiculous things you've seen in someone's will? A client has 2 sons. He left a whole bunch of specific distributions to one of the sons, his truck, gun collection, etc. To the other son he specifically left one thing, a poster of himself in high school. No idea if there was some significant sentimental value behind the poster or if it was more of a look at what I'm giving your brother, and here's a poster of me so you will never forget that I loved you less. Based on my layman's understanding of the subject, the poster is a way of preventing the hated son from successfully challenging the will on the grounds that he was an accidental omission of some kind. Kind of like tipping a crappy waiter 5 cents instead of stiffing them completely. Did a few pro bono wills up on the reservation. This big guy asks me to give everything back to the tribe because he has no living immediate family. No problem. Then he has one exception. His Vietnam era motorcycle. Said it was the first thing he bought after getting home. Wants to be buried with it. I should clarify, not with it. Literally on it and in riding position. I helped him set aside the funds necessary to do it and have a lot prepaid for. Dude was awesome. That guy is gonna be the coolest zombie in the apocalypse. My professor just said that he had someone in the early 80s that left his 3 sons and grandsons his extensive baseball card collection. It seemed normal when my professor first heard of it, but then he was handed a handwritten chart that had several hundred cards listed with the name of the recipient and why that person was getting the card. I leave this picture to Bobby because Bobby can't throw worth a dang. This makes me want to start drafting my will right now. My mom only works for crazy rich people. The worst will she ever told me about was this old guy who was close to 90. He wanted it so that when he dies, all of his millions will go into a trust for his kids and his kids will never be able to touch it, but they can collect the interest it generates. So he had my mom set him up with this group of accountants who will manage the trust, and he specifically arranged a plan with them to manage the account in such a way that their yearly billing will almost exactly match the interest to be made. So when he dies his kids will inherit millions but will only be able to spend like $35 a year from it. $35 that the kids have to split between them. My dad teases my brother and I that his will has a stipulation that he be cremated and his ashes baked into a loaf of bread and that my brother and I have to eat said loaf of bread to qualify for any inheritance. The scary thing is my dad is a lawyer who writes wills. That's truly disgusting. I remember reading about a fellow who wrote into person X, I leave 50 cents, with which he should buy a good, stout rope to hang himself with, and thus rid the world of his wretched existence. 54-year-old, very wealthy, no children, not married, left his 6-month-old, at the time of drafting, nephew a 1980 Lamborghini Countach LP 4000S. Had no idea, had to Google it, it is expensive. Poor kid, that's going to be expensive to maintain. Had a guy be extremely charitable when we were drafting his will. $1 million to his church, $2 million to a local hospital, another $2 million to the American Heart Association. When we gave him a quote on how much it cost to draft the will, it wasn't much because it was a rather straightforward document. He asked for a payment plan. He couldn't afford the will. Dude had no money. He thought you could just leave money to people, organizations, and the government would foot the bill. He was also the sort that became visibly angry talking about welfare and government handouts, which made his thinking even funnier to me. Like a crap Robin Hood. My grandpa originally had just 2 grandkids, my brother, 17, and I, 22. He has a collection of nice cars. Originally, I was getting his 2 Corvettes and my brother was getting his Cadillac and a race car. Well, my aunt and uncle finally coughed up some kids, and my mom is about to have another baby, so now there's 8 grandkids. He's announced that he will be having a contest for the cars. The contest is to make him an apple pie that tastes just like his mother's. A good friend of mine looked after this old lady. She was his neighbor and as far as he knew she had no family. So every day he was at her place when he wasn't working. I met her a few times. Sweet old lady. She had 3 cats that were her babies. Spoiled them to no end. Had a cat room for them with 3 separate beds and 3 separate litter boxes, bowls, ect. Well, one day after looking after her for a few years he walks in to find she passed in her sleep. Later he finds she named him in her will. He gets to the wedding to find 320 some ladies there too. Finds out they are the lady's daughters. Turns out the lady had moved across the country unannounced a few years earlier and disappeared from the daughters' lives. The old woman left my buddy $19 million. She left the cats to a lifelong friend from her home state, donated all her belongings to Salvation Army, left her daughters each a single litter box and all of its contents, along with each a single $20 bill to give them each a last taste of all she was to them. Sweet old lady is my hero. Not a lawyer, but a law clerk. I draft the wills. My personal favorite bequest was elephants go to the grandchildren, largest to smallest. Do the largest elephants go to the largest grandchildren? Also, are these real elephants or elephant statues or something? I'm still not really sure what they meant by that. Hey, that's my great grandma. She died. R.I.P. I am indeed a lawyer, and this happened this week. Client wanted to cremate her alive and healthy animals when she passed away. I have 2 younger siblings, but my parents haven't altered their will in a long time. So it reads, all assets shall be divided up between Nicole Tesla, and any other children we may have. So we poke fun at my youngest sister for just being any other children we may have. Also, I'm the only son, of an only son, of an only son, of an only son. So my grandfather put in his will that I was to get $1,000 for every child that bore my last name, legitimate or not. I was 6 at the time. When my father passed away, we found out he hadn't updated the will since I was 9 years old. My aunt and uncle got custody of 2 women that were 30+ years. LOL. Upon her death we read the will of my grandma, a very serious lady, that she had to be wearing a push-up bra if there was an open casket. I didn't realize this could be stipulated, but I'm totally stealing your grandmother's idea. Filthy rich man was the owner of 2 pet ferrets at the time of his death. He freaking loved these ferrets and wanted to ensure that these ferrets were taken care of when he passed, so informed his sons that the ferrets were to receive all of his property. My since passed aunt and uncle wrote up a will right before my uncle died. I was about 3 at the time and maybe meet my uncle a handful of times. Fast forward 15 years, my aunt passes with the same will, and half my family goes to settles all the affairs. Weeks later I overhear my mom on the phone talking about the will. It was set up that I get 50% of all assets, plus the house and any cars, while everyone else, 8 or 9 people, get the other 50%. But I also received controlling factor, giving me the right to settle any arguments between everyone else. I was about 3 when this will was written, but my uncle said that there was something special about me and deemed I should get 50%. Sadly there was nothing left because it was used on my aunt's end of life care. To me it wasn't the money, I could really care less. Just the fact that I barely knew my uncle but he liked me so much he wrote me in like that, and that my aunt agreed with him and didn't touch his will. My favorite part of this is imagining a 3-year-old settling arguments between family members bickering about the will. My uncle wanted to 1. Be cremated. 2. Mix the ashes into gunpowder. 3. The gunpowder put into bullets. 4. Half the bullets shot in the general direction of his homeland, in Asia. 5. The other half distributed with a lottery system based on which people listed in his will have the most guns. 6. Most of his money given to the bearers of the bullets. 7. The bullets must be fired within a year or we lost the money. Yay. He liked guns. My dad wants to be cremated, have his ashes loaded into shotgun shells and have those shotgun shells fired at the Kurt Ludwig's dad memorial trap shoot. We'll have a BBQ and do something my dad loved, ideally while the wind is blowing away from the shooting positions. I am not a lawyer, but when I was in college someone died and left money to the college, and in the will it said, I don't care what you do with the money, throw the kids an ice cream party or something, and that is exactly what the money was used for. They threw a gigantic ice cream party. Man, if I ever get rich, I'll do exactly that. People remember ice cream parties. Not a lawyer, but my mother revealed to me recently that it is explicitly said in her will that my brother is to receive his inheritance only after he has to give me a big hug. Not sure if it can be enforced, but that kind of says something about how my brother feels about me. Not a lawyer, but my mom had her will updated to say that if me or my brother announce her death on Facebook then we are out of it. It sounds kind of harsh, but me and my brother think it is hilarious. She did it because she doesn't give a crap about Facebook, but all her friends do and they keep pestering her to get one, and she thinks it's tacky to announce a death on there. This guy's will wasn't notable, but his medical power of attorney gives someone the power to make medical decisions on your behalf if you are unable. Got pretty interesting. He wanted to instruct his agent to arrange a lesbian sex show for his viewing pleasure on his deathbed. I told him it probably wouldn't be enforceable and instead wrote a provision requesting, but not requiring, that the agent arrange for strippers to perform for him, but no sex or other physical contact. He eventually changed his mind about the whole thing. He had just divorced his wife and I think he merely wanted to pee her off, knowing that she would probably see it. That would be a legendary funeral. I remember a case from law school that was used to teach the concept of the holographic will, wherein a dude was run over by his own tractor and pinned to the ground. He was able to scratch his will into the paint on the tractor's fender and it held up in court. I had a teacher tell me that one recently. Crazy stuff. A man who wanted his cremated remains to be sprinkled on the crotches of well-endowed teenage boys. I have assumed it was some kind of joke. I mean, how would his heirs even make that happen? He had died and I was just determining the ownership of his former real estate, so I didn't ask. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but I can answer this one. My grandpa left $1 to my piece of crap thief of a dad with the instructions to shove up his butt. I haven't personally seen the will, so I don't know if this is true or not, but he was a World War II vet and total badass, so I believe it 100%. NALB, but read about a New York heiress who died in her 90s and named her 2 grandchildren in her will, meaning they showed up for the wedding. Actually, what was written in her will was into my grandchildren X and Y I'll leave nothing, for reasons that are known to them. For reasons that are known to them. Ice, cold. Not a lawyer, but have done plenty of internships, vacation schemes. Favorite has to be woman who had fallen out massively with her daughter because she hated the husband that the daughter had chosen. This feud went on for years to the point where they never had any contact, and whenever they did things would just get pretty ugly, with the daughter refusing to leave the husband and the mother demanding that she did. So when the time came to read the will, it turned out that the mother had left a good portion of money to the daughter, 10-20% of the sizable estate. There were 3 or 4 children, on the sole condition that the daughter change her surname and her children's surname back to her maiden name, effectively removing this hated husband's name significance on their family tree. By the sounds of it, this was a real sticking point for the daughter, and I was at a law firm whilst this whole saga was going on. The solicitors were pretty confident that the daughter was going to forsake her inheritance, which was a pretty large one, in order to keep her husband's name. It would be funny if the son-in-law's last name was something cool like Maxworth and the maiden name was something horrible like Balgabla. Man, have I seen some bad ones recently. Had this little old lady come in, a referral from one of our clients who was an accountant. He said she was a little bit strange but nothing too odd. Lady had 4 children. Her husband had passed. Had a couple of $100,000 in various bank accounts plus a house. So she appoints her friend as executor and trustee, with the direction to sell her house when she dies. A sizable portion of her estate was to go to some weird church. The balance of her estate is to be invested and used to house her 3 little dogs or any dogs that she has at her death, with the direction that her trustee look after the dogs. Those dogs are going to be much more wealthy than myself in a couple of years. Not a lawyer, but my so's father was, and he always said his favorite story was of this old money lady he knew of. She was worth around 15 mil and had 5 kids, one of whom married a horrible man who would spout just the foulest freaking crap against anyone that wasn't a white, rich, able-bodied, Christian male. When she died, each child got 3 million, except for the piss baby's wife. She donated that money to things like HBCUs, Planned Parenthood, the Special Olympics, her local synagogue, food banks, etc. Because you both deserve to die penniless and hating each other for being awful human beings. Just look at all this money going to people you hate. Probably stung more than just getting nothing. Not a lawyer, but my father-in-law was assigned to be executor of a will from a rich aunt. She left Per her will, 95% of her stuff, which was quite a lot, to a Children with Cancer Foundation, noble cause. But there was no foundation with that name. Now he had to find a worthy cause that would basically fulfill the deceased aunt's will, which was a effing nightmare. Dang. Guess St. Jude's would have counted. My husband told me that when he dies, I'm to have him cremated, and drank as tea. Told him I'd do anything for him, but not that. Maybe that's what Meatloaf was talking about. My dad's will says his middle finger is to be preserved to start a clone army, and his ashes are to be shot out of a cannon by his childhood best friend. Not a lawyer, but my dad was sick and he knew he wouldn't be around for much longer and he wanted his will to be done. He was a super practical joker and always told us that when he died he wanted to be cremated and his ashes put in the pepper pots at Wimpy. So the lawyer is taking the notes and asks what he wanted done when he passed away. I froze and looked at him and he had the biggest smile ever and just said he'd like to be cremated. I was so relieved. We both had such a good laugh about it afterwards and he said he'd never have made me do it. Gosh, I miss him so much. Sad. That's hilarious. He sounds like he was a great guy. Sister used to work for a non-profit in Philly that was frequently the recipient of bequests from wealthy estates. The non-profit has been around for at least 200 years, and they have some really odd bequests still kicking around. One she mentioned, they were left a sum of money each year from an estate, so long as they arranged to ship a set of books to Liberia each year. The head of estate was an abolitionist, and he wanted to help the ex-slaves in the new at the time country of Liberia get started. For a good stretch in the late 80s and 90s, though, no one would deliver to Liberia thanks to its civil war. So someone from the foundation had to hop over to Africa and hand deliver a box of books to a war zone in order to keep the bequest happy. The particularly annoying part was that it wasn't a lot of money, $150 a year, or whatever it was a huge bequest in, say, 1,815. But these days it doesn't go far towards transporting things to Africa. She spent a lot of time making presentations asking people not to do things like that. NALB but was the executor of a family member's estate. The most satisfying part was the hateful seal of the deceased who was initially in the will, but she had gotten the deceased to drastically increase her amount by cutting out my immediate family members while he was in the hospital before a major surgery. Once he recovered from surgery, he redrafted and wrote her out. That is so satisfying to hear. Calm as a bee. My uncle left instructions for the burial plot next to his to be kept and maintained for the eventual burial of his widow, my aunt. I always thought that was incredibly presumptuous of him. He was older and she was still an attractive middle-aged woman when he died. She got married 2 more times, in fact, both of those husbands died too. To lose one husband is unfortunate. To lose 3 sounds like carelessness. It wasn't in the will itself, but one time I was helping a nice older lady out with her will and I ended up uncovering that her nursing home was stealing from its patients. Lance Corporal told to get a will before a deployment. Young single idiot. 2 specific provisions concerning his death funeral. He wanted to be dressed in an Armani suit, and he wanted to be burned. Naturally I inquired as to the latter. I said like a pyre. He didn't know what a pyre was. After a pause, he says I just had it in my mind that I'd like be on the ground, just burning. You got it, Sparky. Not a lawyer, but a co-worker of mine has it in his will that before he is cremated, he is to be wrapped in bacon. He has no family and a lot of money and this dude loves bacon. He said it's gonna cost somewhere between $2,000 and $2,500 to be cremated in bacon, but totally worth it to him. Must be a nice change for whoever runs the crematory and doesn't have to smell burnt humans for a change. Obligatory. Not a lawyer, but I know the guy who did this. My dad's his accountant and I keep having to meet him for some reason. His dad left him the family business which wasn't worth masses, but it was still a nice amount. The will stated that if he sold it, 1/3 of its value had to go to each of his 2 sisters. Well, the business started booming after a little while, and the business was then worth millions. The guy sold the business and gave his sisters 1/3 of what it was worth. He hired some lawyers to deal with his sisters when they tried to get 1/3 of its current value, but because of the wording in the will, he won. The guy then just invested and owns ridiculous amounts of land. He's bought whole fields just so he has somewhere away from people to have a picnic with his significantly younger wife. I can totally agree with that though. I mean, he did take the business and make it immensely more successful. Not a lawyer, and it may not even be true since it was in our legal advice post, but a few months ago this guy was posting his parents' will, in which they wanted all of their assets liquidated, sold for cash, and then have all of the cash burned. I once was asked to put a stipulation in a woman's will that her dog be put down and buried with her once she dies. I was really uncomfortable and discussed with my boss. In the end my boss told me to do it. Dogs are personal property and she gets to decide what is done with her personal property after death. I thought this was pretty cold-blooded and made me sad for her pet. She was fairly young still, in her 70s, and in good health, so my hopes were that the dog passed away before she did. In the end, had one of my colleagues draft it who didn't have such an affinity for dogs. Not a lawyer. I do title for oil and gas leasing. This lady in the turn of the century left her husband enough money for a bottle of whiskey and a W because that's all he ever wanted anyway. Also had a will that stipulated all of his slaves to be freed. Subsequently there were recorded deeds conveying freedom to a black husband and wife. That one hit me hard. It never actually made it into the will, but a friend's grandmother wanted to leave her credit card debt to her creditor. Turns out you can't do that. My will includes language to disinherit any child that contests the will. You get what you get and you don't throw a fit, or you get nothing. Not a lawyer, but my grandmother left my father out of her will, and by extension, me and my sister. She always been an angry person. Her only form of affection is buying people things. When it comes to interaction with the family, it's been nothing but insults and negativity. We're all stupid. We're all worthless. Why can't we be more like such and such as kids, and so on. My father moved our family across the country, and one of the biggest reasons was to be closer to her. We visit her all the time, call her all the time, and then several months ago my grandmother told my father that he's cut out of her will and that she's already started transferring her assets to his brother. She supposedly had a lot of things to say about my dad, my stepmom, me and my sister, about how we don't care about her, and that we're so bad to her. Ever since then, we hardly even speak to her. This looks bad, you know. If you tell someone no, I don't speak to my 90-year-old grandmother anymore, the one who has always bought me gifts, that sounds awful, doesn't it? I think she did that on purpose. I really do. Because why else would she even say anything? She had no obligation to tell anyone. She wanted to cause problems. Now my father is the bad son and now my sister and I are the ungrateful grandchildren. Not only that, but my uncle, the one who is going to receive her assets, is such a coward that he hasn't even spoken to us either. Doesn't answer calls. Nothing. We don't see our aunt. We don't get to see our cousins anymore. It's a shame. Everything was fine until she decided to break up the family. My grandmother was similar, constantly trying to start crap, accusing various children of theft, picking favorites, etc. About 8 years before she died, her children all got together and agreed to split the inheritance evenly, regardless of what the will said. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.